My name is Marion Fraterola Salino. I'm fortunate to hold not just one, but two roles in this wonderful system here in New Jersey. One, I'm the co-founder and serve as the executive director of Values into Action, one of the many support coordination agencies here at your service in New Jersey. And I'm also one of the founders and serve as the board chair of the Collaborative for Citizen-Directed Supports New Jersey. And that's an association made up of people, anybody, everybody who's interested in promoting, expanding, improving self-direction in New Jersey. And we are fortunate to be the grantee of the New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities Community Innovations Grant that enables us to bring this conference to you today. So I first and foremost want to thank the New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities, as well as Mercedes Bukowski, for believing in this idea to reignite this conference and to provide us with generous funding that, again, has enabled us to make this happen. So today we begin a learning event that will span the next 2 months and provide each of us with the opportunity to give as well as to take away and to ultimately strengthen ourselves and our community. It does seem like forever ago that Donna Shearman and I met for coffee to do just that. We were trying to figure out how to improve the working relationships between the Values Supports Coordination team and her colleagues at PPL to ultimately make the experience of self-direction better for people who were using it. And we know that sometimes significant changes are born out of circumstances just like that. They don't often present as anything significant. And over that coffee and green tea matcha, we grew this idea and invited people in. And again, thanks to the council for believing in this idea and believing that together we could make it work. So the conference here is about honoring the legacies of those who have come before us and have set the foundation, seeded the system that enables authentic autonomy and authority over one's services and one's own life. And we hope through this conference to uplift and support those who continue that effort. I'm going to turn it over to Donna now for a few words, and then we're going to get started. Donna?
Okay, I am unmuted now. Hi, I'm Donna Sherman. I'm from Public Partnerships. I am so happy that this day has come. It has been a long time in the making when Marion and I first got together at Starbucks in downtown Trenton just to kind of talk and get to know each other. And the fact that, you know, we've grown into a friendship, and I'm so proud of the work that the committee that decided to join us has, you know, what we've created. And like I said, you know, we wanted to do more of like a movement where we are all in this together, and we could, you know, look back at our past and record our history, you know, nationally. And then our next one will be, you know, about the New Jersey history. And so, you know, today is just, you know, monumental. I have been personally so inspired over the course of almost 4 years that I've been with Public Partnerships to see how things have come in that short period of time, and amazed by the people that I have met to see how far it's come, you know, from much long ago for the people who really started all of this. The council has been incredible. The folks at DHS and DDD have been great to work with and partnering with us. So, you know, I can't wait to hear Sue kick this off. It's an exciting day. We've literally been waiting for this to happen for, you know, a few years now. And the fact that the day is here is very exciting. So I'm so glad that you've all decided to join. And I'm so glad we were able to do this virtually so that so many more folks can join. And, you know, we've all had to go through so much these past couple of years. So I'm glad that we're here and we're, you know, able to join today. And so I'm, you know, going to leave it at that and turn it back over to Marion and just say thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for supporting, and we're all in this together.
Thank you, Donna. So Sue, anybody who's heard her you got to hear her again and again. And we're thrilled that you're here, Sue. Nobody better to open a conference like this. I've been fortunate enough to work alongside Sue. And every single time I listen, I learn, and then I do my best to go and put that learning into practice. Again, nobody better suited to speak about the struggle and the consequences that arise from supporting each other to live our best lives. So not only the best storyteller I know, but a person, a family member, a citizen, and a leader. Sue, you continue to teach and demonstrate the power of inclusion and of honoring each other for who we are in this moment and all that we bring to this world. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
It's my pleasure to join you, Mary. And as you know, I'm a huge fan of the work that you do. And I've spent a little bit of time telling stories in New Jersey, so I hope too many of you aren't bored by the stories if I tell them again. I think I might have a few new ones up my sleeve, so I will try to bring those out today. I just jumped off a call, which was a workshop on inclusive education for the Global Disability Summit, which is happening in Oslo and online in February of this year. There was a Global Disability Summit in London in 2018, and nations were making commitments to how to improve the inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of life. You might be interested to know that this is one area where the United States is very far out in front. The notion of individualized funding for people with disabilities and individual control of that funding. I think probably British Columbia and maybe New Zealand might be other places where you will see this funding idea. But we, of course, lag in some other areas like inclusive education. And you know that New Jersey, I know there are people from the state here on the call, and this is not a surprise to you. New Jersey has a lot of people living in institutions. When I was in Israel a couple of years ago, I looked at the demographics in the United States, and New Jersey is the closest to Israel. It's about the same size, has about the same number of people, and maybe it has much fewer people. Anyway, the institutional populations are about the same. They have a major effort to close their institutions. And I just want to point out to you that the notion of self-directed supports or self-determination in the classical model, it was first designed as a deinstitutionalization strategy in New Hampshire. It was Tom Nerney who did that project. He had, I think it was only 16 people who he found their families and said, look, if we give you a budget and let you figure out how to spend it, would you bring your sister or brother or son or daughter home from the institution? And these people all said yes. And it was a very successful way to help people understand the amount of money that's being spent in institutions is pretty significant. And Tom's idea was that with that funding, people could create a much better life for someone that they loved or cared for in the community at home. A lot of family members basically gave up their lives to do that. There were a couple of nurses who quit their jobs. There were some parents who quit their jobs and stepped forward to try to help their son or daughter put together a life in the community. I was fortunate in Minnesota in the early years, but then later in Maryland, to live in a state where self-direction and individualized support was possible for my son, Charlie. Charlie was born in 1982 in Minnesota, so just at the beginning of really push for inclusive education, for more inclusion in society and in families. I was a student at Partners in Policymaking in Minnesota in 1989, which is when the US was writing the Americans with Disabilities Act. I know there are a lot of graduates of Partners in Policymaking in New Jersey, and I think that's one of the programs that helps us understand. So here's a couple of top of the mind ideas about self-direction that I think if I were you, if I were going to be working in the system, or if I were a family member, or if I were a person with a disability, these are a couple of things I would want to think about. First, it's really hard to include a person in the community if they're not included in their family. So building the strengths. Tom Nerney was the name. Sorry, Sarah, I just saw your question. Nerney. He just died a couple of years ago. So my Charlie, I have described for some people, Charlie didn't walk, he didn't talk, he was legally blind, he had autistic behaviors, he didn't reliably sleep through the night, he wasn't toilet trained, he couldn't feed himself. And if I describe that to people that way, it sounds like it would be impossible for an ordinary family to raise a person with this level of disability at home. But that's not how we saw him. Charlie was a very charming person. He was happy and often laughing, often the first one in the room to see that something funny was about to happen. He helped connect us as a family, my husband, my two other sons. He helped connect us in a way that I don't think we would have been connected without him. There was a researcher at the University of Minnesota who called it the warm hearth syndrome. That if you have a person with a significant disability in your family, there's always somebody at home. The hearth is always warm. And I think that made our household a different kind of household than it might otherwise have been. So we thought of Charlie as a funny, charming, pardon this, guys, weirdo. That was his preferred term when we asked him, do you like this one? Do you like to be called a person with a disability or a disabled person? Or what would you prefer as a connotation? He preferred person with weirdness. That sort of lets you know a little bit about what his sense of humor was and how he thought about things. It was about the reality of living with his disabilities. So that's the first lesson that I would take about self-direction. There's nothing, to some extent, there's nothing magic about it. It doesn't make the disability disappear. It doesn't make the person suddenly not have the challenges that they have. But it does get rid of the disabilities that society has put on top of them. The disability, the inability to be part of a neighborhood, to be part of a school, to be part of a family, those things, when you have a policy that allows someone to go live in an institution, it disables them from those ordinary, warm kindnesses and friendly, supportive inclusions. That is a kind of disability. It's a disability that's put in place by a policy. When you have a child in a school and they're not allowed to go into the classroom with everyone else, they are disabled from attending school with everyone else. Now, Charlie, because I learned from Ed Roberts about inclusion so early in Charlie's life, 1989, I said, so he was 7 years old when I went to Partners. I really fought for inclusion for Charlie in school, and it helped me to learn what I think is one of the core skills of families who are going to do self-direction. And that is supported decision-making. So we are taught by special education law and by a lot of other things that usually it's the mother, sometimes it's a father, is individually, personally in charge of all the decisions that are made for the person with the disability. So the IEP, usually there's one parent who goes to the IEP meeting, and it's all individualized and brought into this idea that that disability is an individual problem. That's where, if we think about self-determination, thinking of it that way as, oh, now I'm going to have individual control over the budget and the life and everything else, it's a mistake if you don't put in place team thinking about how to support a person who maybe can't make their own decisions. Charlie could decide what he wanted to do. He didn't always have the capability of assessing the risk of his choices. And he certainly couldn't communicate them. He certainly couldn't say, please, I'd like to have a girlfriend. That wasn't something he could say. We could watch him and see who he was paying attention to in a room. I once asked my supported decision-making team, do you think there's any chance that Charlie is gay? Because I wanted to support him if he was. And everybody started laughing, and they said, Sue, come on, you go into a room with Charlie, the first thing he's going to do is find out if there's a girl with long blonde hair in the room. That's his thing. He's not only heterosexual, but he has a type. And when they said that, I knew it was true, because that was how we made it through so much of Charlie's life, was finding people that he could relate to as therapists or as community supporters or as others. So supported decision-making teams are really important. If you already have guardianship, if you're already a guardian for your son or daughter or brother or sister, you can practice guardianship as if it were supported decision-making, to give yourself a ramp, to ramp into backing away from being a guardian and really building a supported decision-making team. There's no reason as a guardian why you should make all of the decisions alone with a piece of paper or alone with a staff member. You have to have the person with the disability with you when you're making those decisions. They are the key to the supported decision-making team. You have to watch them. I think you have to have a lot of other people who know him or her with you, who know them, because you'll learn your decisions. You're making decisions for the person. It's not always perfect, right? As parents, as guardians, as people who are responsible, it's really hard for us to take that lesson in. Because this whole world tells us, you're in charge, we want your decision, we want you to run this. You sign the IEP, you sign the ISP, you sign all this stuff, you make all the decisions. Don't let them do that to you. Morally, it's just too hard. So I can't tell you how many times one of Charlie's friends, or sometimes my husband, or Charlie's brothers, or Charlie's staff people who knew him really well. Charlie lived with an agency when we first came to Maryland. He lived at home with us, but the agency sent support into our house. And Nate was his first support provider. Nate worked with Charlie for 13 years, if you can imagine that. And he knew Charlie. He knew what Charlie liked when nobody else was in the room, right? So Nate was part of our supported decision-making team. We trusted him. He could often say to us, yeah, no, I don't think that's what Charlie likes, and here's why I think that. So if you have this concept of supported decision-making, yes, it is a legal structure, but it can also just be a concept that you work with your team and go forward. Don't let yourself think that self-determination is only about controlling the money. That's one problem that people have, I think, with self-direction, is they think this is about accounting, it's about budgeting, it's about controlling the money and only spending the money on things that we want to spend the money on. Some states have self-determination plans that really aren't that. They give you a budget, and yes, it is individually controlled, and yes, you are responsible to not defraud Medicaid in your reporting of it, but they only allow you to spend it on one or two categories of things. You can't spend it on a computer, you can't spend it on community activities, you can only spend it on staff time, for example. That's a problem. So when Charlie finally moved out of our house, he was 26 years old. He lived in a house that was owned by the housing authority in our county in Maryland. And Charlie and his two roommates rented their spaces from the housing authority with 1/3 of their Social Security check. Charlie's roommate, Andre, was probably as disabled as Charlie. We always thought of him as Black Charlie, but he had the experience of having grown up in foster care. So he was even more systemically disabled than Charlie was. He did not have self-determination plan for his day supports. Charlie did have individual supports provided by Shared Supports of Maryland. And that was a bonk on the side of the head for me. Having someone finally sit down and say, let's get to know Charlie. Let's see what we can think of for him. Let's put some people in his life who can present him with some options. And let's watch him for those responses to those options. So after about a month, we had a new day guy who was funded through Shared Supports. And we had the plan, and I said I would really like Charlie to have a job because he was a grown man and he should have a job. And the VR agency had not been able to identify anything. And when he was in transition in school, they came up with a couple of placements, but Charlie doesn't do well in a placement. The first thing he'll do is start yelling if he doesn't like something. Sorry, I still talk about him in the present tense as if he were still with me. And he's not. Charlie died almost 9 years ago next week. So there's that. Anyway, this guy's Nat, who's working with Charlie, and he calls me up and says, hey, do you think Charlie would like to do dog walking? And I said, no, he's afraid of dogs. You shouldn't even try that. My dad had a dog. Charlie was always afraid of the dog. I don't think that will work. And Nat said, well, we're going to try it because he seems to want to try it. And unless you really have an objection, I would like to try it. I said, Nat, knock yourself out, but I'm telling you, Charlie is going to just be afraid and not participate. Well, after a week, Nat called me up and said, okay, we went around the neighborhood. We found a bunch of neighbors who had dogs. We asked them if we could walk their dog just as a practice. And a bunch of them said yes. And we've walked their dogs this week. And I've held the leash while I pushed Charlie's wheelchair. And at the end of the week, Charlie reached over and grabbed the leash, and he wouldn't let go. And Charlie had a bunch of contractures with his various kinds of muscular dystrophy and CP that he had. So once he had a hold of the leash, there was no way you could get that out of his hand. And he said, look, I think what that means is he wants to do this. And I had to say, Nat, I think you're right. I think I'm not there. I'm not seeing it, but I would love to come and observe. And if you can set this up, that he can make a little money walking dogs in the neighborhood. Now, Charlie was less disabled because he lived in a house in the neighborhood. Other neighbors could know him. They could see him. He was part of the neighborhood. When the house went into place, the neighborhood association welcomed them by having their annual potluck at the house. I mean, this was an ordinary Maryland neighborhood, but if you do the work right, there's no NIMBY. Charlie wasn't disabled by being set aside behind some group home rules about who could go outside and when could they go outside. He had the freedom of the neighborhood. And that meant that the neighbors trusted him when he asked, hey, could I walk your dog for a while? Well, it didn't take very long when Charlie had a business where he was walking 20 dogs in the neighborhood with Nat, $10 per 30 minutes every day, some dogs twice a day. Now, he wasn't being paid for all of the dogs. A couple of the dogs that he walked belonged to little old ladies in the neighborhood, couldn't afford to pay him, and that was fine. I wanted him to give back. He was getting a lot of money for his supports, and the idea of giving back was really important to me. So he also donated time to deliver Meals on Wheels, for example. That was part of something that he really liked to do. He liked the connection of rolling up to the door and giving somebody their lunch. I want to talk about money in a minute, but this idea of the dog walking just blew up into a business for Charlie that at one point I actually went to Nat and said, you do know about the limitations of substantial gainful activity, right? I mean, Charlie's not allowed to make more than $2,000 a month. So don't overdo it here, buddy. And anyway, he built a nice business. When he died, at his funeral, there were about 350 people at the funeral. I knew maybe half of them, maybe 2/3 of them. People knew Charlie, but I didn't know a whole bunch of people, like maybe 100 people. They were people from the neighborhood. They were people whose dogs he was walking. He had the keys to 13 of his neighbors' houses in the drawer in the kitchen when he died, because 13 neighbors trusted him to be a part of taking care of their dog. You know, people are nuts about their dogs. They love their dogs. They really need to trust you before they let you be in charge of walking their dog. And he built those relationships with Nat and with self-determination. I think that's really important. So here's the thing. It's not about the money. The system tells you it's about the money. I know people who got so much money for their self-directed supports that you're thinking, how could you possibly spend that much money? Someone in Maryland whose kid came out of an institution, I think the kid was a little bit less disabled than my Charlie was. She used to brag that she had $300,000 a year for his support. Now, I want you guys to choke on that idea. Do not brag to people about how much money you're getting for individualized supports. Do not brag to other families of people with disabilities about how much money you're getting. It's not about the money, it's about the control. It's about being able to organize the funding so that your son or daughter can live a decent life, so that your brother or sister can live a decent life, so that they can have an ordinary life just like everybody else does. Not a peel me a grape life, not a life where they have luxury and dancing girls and something to do every minute of the day and staff and staff and more staff. Now, in today's world, it's probably unlikely that you would be given that kind of budget. I mean, this was a long time ago. I hesitate to tell you this, but there still are states in the United States that are handing out $250,000 self-direction budgets to people. A, that's a lot of money for you to be responsible for, to not have any Medicaid fraud going on. B, live simply so that others can simply live. Leave some money for other people. If your state keeps insisting that you need more and more and more money, you have to sit down with them and say, who else could you serve on the waiting list if I can give back some of this money? If I can leave some of it on the table. When Charlie died, I was involved in the most difficult advocacy of his career. Inclusion in school, self-direction, the first childhood waiver in the state of Minnesota, all of those things we did for Charlie, taking him to the UN to testify on supported decision-making. That stuff was a piece of cake. Getting Medicaid to get rid of the awake overnight staff at his house was the hardest thing I ever did. When Charlie lived with us, we didn't have awake overnight staff. We had groggy parents who would drag their way out of bed and try to go down and figure out what was wrong with him and try to figure out some way to calm him down and put him back to sleep. We didn't have awake overnight staff. As soon as he moved out, they assigned awake overnight staff to him. We started tracking for 6 months. We tracked what happened with awake overnight staff. Charlie was never awake at night in his new home unless the staff woke him up. So it was the new habit of living in a new house, in his own space, in his own room, gave him, I think, more confidence and more comfort about going to sleep. And he just stopped the waking up that he did with us all the time. I couldn't get rid of it. Finally, I had to go to the state director in Maryland and say, tell me that you can't bring someone off the waiting list with 8 hours a day of personal assistance services. And they went, oh, now we get it. You want to reduce the budget so that other people can have the supports that they need. Yes, that is exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to create Medicaid liability. I'm not trying to do anything else. Charlie's house had Charlie and Justin and Andre were the 3 disabled residents. They each had their own room. And then there was an apartment where the staff lived. So if we had a sensor in Charlie's room, we could have told John, oh, you got to get upstairs because Charlie's awake. He wasn't able to getting out of bed by himself. He couldn't get up and run out to the kitchen and turn on the gas stove. None of those things could have happened. And I knew so many parents who were still waiting for something. We all have to be responsible for helping to make systems that can bring everyone into the world of self-determination and bring everyone into freedom and bring everyone out of the back bedroom into the community. It is a pleasure to live simply so that others can simply live. You will find it strengthens you when you start thinking that way. okay, now that I have this, and in my experience, usually you have to go into the space where you have too much support before you realize it's too much. And you think, okay, how do I get rid of this? When Charlie got his first PCA, a lovely man in Minnesota, when Charlie was a kid, because he had the first waiver for kids in Minnesota. After about a week, I was like, all right, how do I get rid of this 20-something guy sitting on my couch all the time? Because I don't really think that this is going to work if the idea of Charlie having support means that I'm going to have another member of my household all the time. So I started dreaming up, okay, what are the other things that I can do to get Charlie engaged in the community and get Peter into the support system. So here's what I want you to understand. What you will see when you watch, and if you're doing self-directed supports, you get to see everything. What you will see is there's a graph, and money is along the bottom here, and up along the side here is freedom. And the more money you spend, the more freedom you get. Sorry, I can't figure out how to do this with the mirroring of the more freedom you get, until all of a sudden, the more money you spend, the less freedom you have. If you talk to people with disabilities, they will call this the person sitting on my couch controlling the remote control. The more money you spend, the more you're putting that person in constraints of not having any chance to just be themselves. Now, maybe for some people, you do need that constraint, but you should start thinking about the environment then, and how can I change the environment so that the person has more freedom within that environment? There's a wonderful book called Making Homes That Work for People on the Autism Spectrum. It's by George Braddock. You can find it online. If your child has a life-threatening issue, or if they hurt themselves, I can understand, of course, what the need is for staffing. But I want to tell you a story from George's life experience. George designed Charlie's house for us. George is in Eugene, Oregon. The book is online. You can get it for free. George's wife was a friend of mine, and George had done a house for Colin. Colin had the most autism I ever saw in my life. And while he was growing up, he would destroy toilets. Wherever he saw one, he would destroy it, typically the toilet in his own house. The name of the book is Making Homes That Work for People on the Autism Spectrum. If you can't find it, I'll send a link to Marion so that you can have it. It's a design book. Anyway, George designed a house for Colin that, this was a situation where toileting was a key problem. Toilets were being broken all the time. You can imagine the stress and strain about that. Colin couldn't be with other people. He would lose it. He grew up in a family, but he was now going to live in a home with other people. Here's a couple of design features of the house. The walls were not made out of drywall or plasterboard. They were made out of plywood with a skim coat of plaster. Why? Colin couldn't punch a hole through it. The toilet was imported from Israel. It looked like an ordinary toilet. I saw it, but it was hardened in its construction. So it couldn't be pulled off the wall. It couldn't be broken. It wasn't made of porcelain. You couldn't smash it. And Colin had a little sitting room. There was an aquarium built into the wall, and Colin could see through the aquarium into the living room on the other side and make up his own mind about whether he wanted to go join that conversation or not. He didn't have to be just dragged into the room and react. Instead, he was able to watch and observe and make his own decisions. His laundry room had a giant fan, exhaust to the outside, so that when there were issues, the other ladies in the house didn't have to suffer from the various smells of all the laundry and what was going on. The toilet, it was interesting. The toilet had a television set right across from it on the wall. And when Colin sat on the toilet, the television played, and it played a loop of all of his favorite cartoons. And when he stood up off the toilet, it stopped playing the cartoons. This encouraged him to stay and finish his job. These are the kinds of things that it's really important to think about, because now Colin has given up. When I saw him, he had given up breaking toilets. So you could take him out to a restaurant, because you could go into the bathroom and you wouldn't try to destroy the bathroom when you were in the restaurant. You could take him, George worked in construction, you could take him to Home Depot and he wouldn't go down the row of toilets and try to destroy them all in the Home Depot store, which he did one time. None of us knows what the people that we're working with, what they really might need to be able to achieve freedom in their daily life. But Colin's home, and Charlie's home, frankly, allowed them to move around and be free and have less concern and less worry. Charlie's bathroom had to be significantly worked on to make it into what George called a super bath. So it was a big bathroom. It was basically a wet room that you could go into and shower Charlie and not have to lift him. He was a very low tone guy, a very big guy, and lifting him when he was wet was very dangerous for the person caring for him as well as for him. So, and you know, bathrooms are very dangerous places. These are all things that were part of the design of the home, not part of the self-determination waiver or the supported decision making, but I'm putting it in front of you because I think push for your self-direction waiver to have opportunities for you to think about the environment as well as just staff. Staff is great. The right staff can make all the difference in your life. But Charlie's house, when he moved out from our house, he never wanted to stay here again overnight. I think it's because he felt so much more secure at that house, the way the bathroom was and the way his room was. And after he moved out, he came back here maybe about a month later. He used to spend every Sunday with us. And I'm in the kitchen making dinner, and I turned around and all of a sudden there he was. He had never done that before in 26 years of life. He had never come into the kitchen. And I had never really thought about it, but the open plan, the layout of his house allowed him to go wherever he wanted to go, walk his little wheelchair around wherever he wanted to go. That was freeing for him. It was liberating. And, was I horrified that at 26, I hadn't ever thought about that? I hadn't ever sort of noticed, he doesn't really move around the house very much. Of course I was. That's the other thing about self-direction. And when you're really doing supported decision-making, make peace with the idea that you're going to be learning all the time. Because once people begin to understand that they're in charge of their life, that there really is self-direction, they will experience things, they will learn, they will move on, they will need you to be able to respond and learn and grow and change. That's the opposite of institutional life. An institution isn't a building with just people in it in a big building. That's not what makes an institution. Control makes an institution. And putting somebody, you can put them in a beautiful home, but if they're in a psychological box, that's an institution. So self-direction is the way out of that. But don't expect that you can put together a perfect plan at the beginning and then just sit back and enjoy it. That's not how it works. There will be times when you are just thinking, oh God, how did I never see this? Well, maybe it wasn't true before. You know, maybe this has been a learning. Have friends, have people you can go to and trust and who will help you stay honest and help you respond to the emotional difficulty of really engaging in self-direction. It is a new way of thinking. It's a new way of looking at disability in the world and looking at all of our support roles in that world. People will tell you things all of a sudden, even if they don't speak, that you never realized. So I encourage you to build up the New Jersey self-direction plan as much as you can. I encourage you to keep having conferences where you can keep learning from each other, keep sharing ideas. I'd like to open it up for questions, if that's okay, Marion. I don't know how you would like me to do that, or should I just look at the chat, or is there a Q&A box, or?
Hi, Sue. Thanks. Yes, there's some things in the chat. I don't know necessarily. I think you were able, you were spot on able to answer some of the questions that were in there, and I think you did speak to one of the comments.
Yeah, I'm going to address Cindy's comment because I think
Sure.
it's really aggressive, and I appreciate it, Cindy, but I would never say that everyone is the same as everyone else. My Charlie was a 1 in 5 million level of disability. So, and I happen to know that for a fact, and I do not think he was like anybody else. I don't think anybody else was like him. I think what's the same about him is he had a family that loved him, the same as your adult child has a family that loves you. And you know their needs. All I'm saying is when you start to put freedom into the person's life, you may have some better ideas about what actually works. Safety has many, many, many sources. And relationship is a great source of safety in someone's life. So that's my response to you, and we can have this conversation individually if you like at some point. I can talk to you about the history of self-direction a little bit more if somebody wants that, if Laura wants that. I have tried to speak about the challenges of self-direction and the huge commitment from family members. I've seen way too many self-direction arrangements fall down because basically the mother becomes the paid staff and she quits her job and that's what she does. And she's doing the accounting, she's doing the case management, she's doing everything else. That's not how it worked for me. And I would encourage you to think about that. If you love your son or daughter or your brother or sister or someone that you are caring for, that can't be bought. It can't be paid for. And that's what I meant when I said, don't think of self-direction as just being about the money. Try to think of it as a way for you to create better relationships in a person's life. And
how do I speak on this thing?
I hear you.
You hear me? Good,
Yep.
good, good. I'm anxious to talk to you. I know you said we could do some things online. I've been doing self-direction for 5 years with a 31. And to keep him safe. As you know, there's not a lot of breakthroughs in terms of medication treatments, but we keep trying. He's at ECT. We've done everything. He was abused and neglected in the system, which obviously prompted my decision to do self-direction. I have trained a bunch of families in New Jersey on how to set up self-direction. But
Good.
it really, really upsets me that if you do understand how different the needs can be, that you would make statements saying that you advocated for budgets to go down. I am dying here with my son. I mean, we can't make it, and you know, I can't
Cindy,
get it.
let me just say, one of the reasons I was saying, I don't advocate for budgets to go down. I advocate for each of us to think about taking what we need and leaving the rest for somebody else who may need it. So if someone's following my instruction to try to take what you need and live simply so that other people may simply live, you would probably be one of the key beneficiaries of that. And on purpose. I mean, I completely agree with you. There are people who have really difficult lives, and I understand that. So I want to take this offline, though. I don't want to make this about you versus me. And
no, it's not that. It's not about you versus me. It's that
I understand it, but let me just say a couple of things.
When you make statements like that, what it does is it really makes people feel victimized again. You cannot preach to someone who is barely surviving. And I know many people on this call, and they are barely surviving. And they are not getting the support from the state that they need. They are not able to use the money they need to even buy protective gear, much less training for very complex behaviors.
Yeah,
so
no, I know. And you probably want gentle teaching for your staff, and you probably there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done. Yep, I understand.
Well, I'm not sure you do, but thank you for taking my.
Well, I'm really glad you brought it up.
This is Laura, and I would like to add to Cindy's comments too. You know, and she did for a number of years, lived in a residential facility and got pulled out from a program called Return Home New Jersey. And she was put into a group home, and it was really terrible for everybody, for her, for us as a family, for her caregivers there, even for the agency. They weren't capable of caring for her. She is now living in her own apartment. Okay, we are doing self-direction. And that was because the state couldn't find an agency that was able to handle her, to take care of her with her budget. So they suggested we do this. So we're doing this, and I'm very happy that she's had this opportunity. But you also have to realize that a lot of individuals who go into self-direction are usually people that have really complex needs, and they can't get services, anything else. So to just broadly paint a picture about developmental centers and people not, and believe me, it's hard living, but their staff is trained. There's clinical oversight for people who have really complex needs, and the community is.
We're not going to talk about that today. I am not prepared.
The community is not there. Like when my daughter moved into the community, we couldn't find her a dentist. The first couple of times she was taken. It was really, really hard.
Yep.
And now being in self-direction, people need to understand the commitment that is involved in doing this. Okay, it's really, really hard. You have to maintain all the funding sources, the Medicaid, the SNAP, the housing voucher, all of that. It takes an enormous amount of time. And on top of that, people that have complex needs, I'm constantly dealing with the insurance companies, the doctors, all the doctor's appointments, and then throw in training staff, firing staff, doing the payroll. It's really, really hard. And those are the things that need to be addressed. It's trying to streamline these services to make it easier for families to obtain this. I believe in self-direction. Is it sustainable for my family? It's not. If something happens to me or my husband, I don't know what we're going to do. But right now, it's working. And it is a great thing. And I'm very, very happy that we've had this opportunity, because never in a million years, given the degree of her disabilities, did I ever dream of her being in a position like this. And she's doing well. You know, she's happy. She's staying healthy. She hasn't been in the hospital in like 2 years now, which has been through this whole COVID thing, has been a miracle.
Yep.
So,
yep, I hear you. And please don't take this the wrong way. We really need to find ways to have these conversations with our friends in a warm and loving environment. We need to find ways to express our pain that doesn't make it sound like we're just ignoring our sons or daughters' pain at the same time. Self-direction, I told you, I said it's hard. It's not just hard to do the Medicaid accounting. It's hard to do the emotional learning that is required to really allow your son or daughter to be in the lead. I told you about the history in New Hampshire. My argument with Tom Nerney was always, oh yeah, you can take 16 people out of institutions as long as they all have sisters and mothers who will give up their lives and do everything required to bring them home. That's great. But the mother also has human rights, right? And that's really hard for people to get their head around. Self-determination, self-direction is not just a way to employ the mother full-time in the care of their son or daughter. That's really not what it's for. And you also have a right to have a life. And you have a right to have a life that's not only about your disabled son. If you have other children with disabilities or without disabilities, you have a right to be their parent as well. You have a right to be a member of your community. I can't tell you how many families I've met who can't get free to go and vote on election day because they're too involved in care. Well, you have a right to be a citizen. You have a right to go to a PTA meeting. You have a right to all kinds of things. You have a right to employment. So I think that these are things, that we need to think about is, again, self-direction isn't just about a person or that person's family. It really has to be about all of us and how we relate to each other. And it's not just a contest to see whose kid has the most disability. We got to be really careful about that. Because as I tried to explain at the beginning, disability is also a social construct. And you can take a person who has the same limitations as someone else, and if you put them in a worse, more controlling environment, they will be more disabled. So, yes, I just saw a comment that said our sons and daughters have a right to have a life with experiences that don't include their parents. Thank you for that. One of the hardest self-direction meetings I had was, does anybody have any ideas about how we're going to let Charlie express his sexuality? I had for a while a rule for myself that I had to say the word sex in every presentation, because generally speaking, in the intellectual and developmental disability world, people are supposed to be asexual or something, I guess. And we found a couple of therapists who were willing to help me work on this. But what I said to the team is, okay, so this is a self-determination. This is a supported decision-making team. You're talking about self-determination. I think it's important for Charlie to think about sex, and maybe he just learns how to masturbate and learns how to do that privately and whatever. But I'm his mother. I do not want to know about this. He doesn't want me to know about this. This is how mothers work. You don't want your mother looking over everything in your life. And anyway, it's important to be thinking about this. Cindy, I see you reaching out for collaboration with others. I think that is so important. If you can put together some folks who will help you walk through the frustrations and help you think about them, and you can help them. Obviously you have, if you've helped that many people already. That kind of support group is really important. Those kind of friendships are really important. Even if all you do is go and have a cup of coffee, even if all you do is go and talk about something else or go to a movie together, those are still important.
Sue, sorry. There's some other comments. I'm not sure if you just want to take the questions as you see them, or if it's easier for one of us to read them aloud.
Yeah, supported decision-making is an evolving reality. So I don't know of any states that have put together really clear legal systems. British Columbia in Canada did, and that you can look that up. They're a little bit more advanced probably than most of us are, but it is, I think you should look at it and learn about how it works, whether or not your state has a official system. Because as I said, even if you have single guardianship, you can still operate it as supported decision-making and begin to plan for ways for you to return the legal capacity to the person for whom you are a guardian. That is the first responsibility of a guardian, by the way, is to find ways to ensure that all of the decisions you make are pro-community inclusion, and also that you are always looking for ways to return legal capacity to the person for whom you are guardian. So these are complicated issues. I hesitate to say, but I haven't been looking at supported decision making around the country lately. So it has challenges. Some of the challenges are, you may know that there are people in the intellectual and developmental disabilities world who are advocating for access for folks to organ transplantation. And that's really an interesting question, because organ transplantation is really difficult. You have to sign on for a lifetime of management of a transplant. And there's plenty of people without disabilities who, once they find out what's involved, decide not to go ahead, decide not to do a transplant. Well, I think we need to be really careful that a parent, and frankly, medical systems won't accept the opinion of a guardian that says, oh, I want my child to have a heart transplant. But we have to be really careful that we don't somehow give the parent of an adult child some kind of ownership that says, oh yeah, you go ahead and give him a kidney transplant. That's fine. There are some decisions that you really just can't make for other people. And I think one of the challenges with supported decision making is, how will you make those decisions? How is it possible in a supported decision making model to reach a decision about something like choosing medical care that's very involved? I really appreciate the side conversation that's going on here about gentleness on the side. Gentle teaching is the only thing that I've ever seen really work for somebody who, for example, is coming out of the Judge Rotenberg Center in Boston. I've met people who have exposed their brain tissue because they hit their head so much, and who have achieved healing and calm through gentle teaching. So I do think, George, I really want to thank you for your point that as the family grows older, the individual's needs grow. This is another big reason to do a supported decision-making team. My husband and I, there's no way, if Charlie were alive, there's no way we would be able to care for him in our home just because of our continuing disabilities. And the supported decision-making team included Charlie's brothers and sometimes his cousins and other younger family members who were willing to step up and always be there for him. And that's the other problem with self-determination. If we narrow it down and make the mother in charge of everything and give her total control, and she's the guardian, then who else is nearby who understands? Who else is nearby who's doing what they do because they love someone? That's the community that we need to build. It's not weakness, it's a strength for a family to build that kind of support and community. Jennifer, I see your hand is raised. Jennifer Arias. Nope, you're still on mute, so I'm guessing you didn't mean to raise your hand. I'm trying to follow the chat. Thank you, Julia, for recognizing that the asexual assumption is dangerous. It's dangerous for women as well as men. Jennifer, I see you're unmuted, please. Nope, you're still muted.
I wanted to say that I applaud everything that you're saying. And the part that you said the mother actually is an individual in and of herself and has the right for certain things in her own life. I'm a registered nurse and I quit my job, honestly, to stay home with my son. Otherwise, I'd have the career that I worked so hard for to get those degrees. But sometimes I feel a little bit of jealousy from my friends. I feel tremendous guilt with the generous amount of money that I'm being given to take care of my son, because people are like, he looks fine. Oh, he's such a great kid. That's because I've done damage control for all these years. That's because I've worked with him. That's because I know him and he acts when he's with me in a different way than when you put him in a group home or a program and stuff like that. And it's like some of the backlash you get from people is really hard to maneuver emotionally in your own life. I'm going to put myself back on mute now because I had to pull over. I'm driving to an appointment.
Thank you for pulling over, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Be safe first. The most important thing that you can do is notice your feelings. And that's what you've started. That's what you're talking about, is you've noticed how you feel about the other people in your life and how you feel about your career. I think this is something we still have to think about really seriously in policy for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. What is the proper role of the family? And frankly, all of the systems that we have were built to take care of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who needed round-the-clock, maybe not 24/7, but round-the-clock planning and support. And we can't let that now just revert to saying, well, we're just going to transfer some money and we're going to leave that in the hands of the family. if you're feeling a little bit locked up in it, I assure you your son is too. And it's important to find ways to share responsibility for the ability to respond. Let me put it that way. So when he's having a good day, who besides you can respond to that? When he's having a bad day, who beside you can respond to that? And building that in is not easy. It's not always just about more staff or more money. It's sometimes about just better connections and more connections. I think the pandemic has forced a lot of families to deal with these questions. Most people I know who have someone with a disability at home are basically isolating. They have been. And I think what we learned is that isolation is incredibly difficult and dangerous psychologically. And I hope we keep remembering that, because it will keep us from isolating our sons and daughters and our brothers and sisters in the future. But I don't know how we're going to deal with that. People isolate because they don't trust the other people at the supermarket to wear a mask properly or to be vaccinated. And man, this has been so hard. People's staff have fallen apart. I think it would be interesting to do a study, and maybe New Jersey could do this, to really think through how has self-direction been more sustainable or more resilient during the pandemic than other models have been. I think it is, but I think it would be interesting to look at why that's true. So
On that note.
Thank you. Thank you, Marion.
On that note, so thank you so much. I'm going to shift unless you want to say anything else, and certainly, your conclusion. We have a few minutes, but
my only conclusion is I really appreciate the parents who came at me, and keep doing that. And I'm at sue.swenson@gmail.com, and we can't know what each other are thinking unless we say it. And I certainly didn't mean to say that everyone was the same as my son. And I certainly didn't mean to say that everyone can give money back. But I did mean to say it's important to look at a budget and make sure that you are not isolating someone with too much support. I do think that can be isolating as well. So I really appreciate what you're doing. And Marion, I know you have a true north, and you are going to do this work and build the connections. I know that this is not going to get away from you. And I know that New Jersey has enormous resources and leadership. So
yeah, commitment and leadership, absolutely. And one of the leaders I just wanted to introduce quickly and have Mercedes Witowski come on, because Sue and others in the room, I know I mentioned at the beginning, but if it wasn't for the New Jersey Council, we wouldn't be sitting here. Maybe we would, but it might not have been time.
Well, let me put it this way: if it wasn't for New Jersey, there wouldn't be DD councils, because Elizabeth Boggs is the one who invented that. So thank you, Mercedes, for carrying the flag.
Thank you both. Thanks, Marion, for your words. Thanks, Sue, for really kicking off and sharing with us today this self-direction series. I also want to thank all of you who took the time to Zoom in with us live today, and those of you that will hopefully view this recording who couldn't be here this morning. I'm very appreciative for the New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities for putting me in a position, to bring leadership to the council by working with incredible families, individuals with disabilities, system partners that support people with disabilities and their families. The New Jersey Council on Developmental Disabilities, while we're authorized under the Federal Developmental Disabilities Act of 2000, there are 56 councils across the country and the U.S. territories with that purpose of assuring that individuals with disabilities and their families participate in the design and have access to the needed community services and the individualized supports. And this conference and this series is a means in which to provide access and to listen to the needs of individuals and families in helping to engage in advocacy, helping engage in the capacity building and the system change that's needed for individuals to be able to contribute and to be able to design and have the services and supports that they ultimately need. It's not easy. We know that. We feel that tension every day in every aspect of what we do. When I got the call this morning, my daughter's direct support professional wasn't coming. There's a lot of juggling, a lot of systems to put in place. It was like, okay, today of all days. But yes, it happens. And then we pivot and we move. So while there's a lot of technical words that go into the Developmental Disabilities Act, what it really boils down to that our charge in New Jersey and in our council is to make sure that people with developmental disabilities and their families have access to what they need, when they need it, and have as much choice and control that they select in order to support themselves to live their best life. And then you as an individual, you as a family, fill in all those blanks. What does that mean for you? So when I think about, what the council does, our charge is very broad. We don't focus on singular issues like only housing or only transportation or only employment. We really have to focus on all of the needs of what people need. And that's not an easy task. So the way we do that is, we bring together stakeholders, we listen to them, we develop a 5-year plan that's required, and then we develop an annual work plan that helps to move us toward the idea of advocacy, capacity building, and systems change. And in our current 5-year plan, we have opportunities. We do some of our work internally, and then we have opportunities and we solicit applications and we award money. We have some applications available right now for funding, but we also have a component called Community Innovation Projects, or CIPs. And I encourage you to go to our website. It's njcdd.org, read our 5-year plan, read about our current grant opportunities, and read about our community innovation projects. And I'll talk a bit more about that in just a second if I have a few more minutes here. So as it relates to this event, you'll see how this session and hopefully this whole series, this is just the beginning. This was a kickoff. This was a get you, thinking more about what's to follow. But when we talk about self-directed Medicaid services, self-directed Medicaid services means that participants or individuals that receive Medicaid and their representatives, when they need one, have the decision-making authority over the certain services and supports that take direct responsibility. And we've heard now discussion today about how that responsibility comes in with a tall order, and it comes in many shapes and sizes. I self-direct some of my daughter's services with her. Others I use a provider for. So the fact that we have some choice and controls in New Jersey, I think is a good thing. But I also hear what some of you are saying or chatting about in the chat, that we need to make sure that the services and supports, even in the self-directed environment, are what we need, when we need them, and how we need them. And I hope that as these sessions unfold, and you're going to hear from other folks in next month, and then throughout March, I hope that we're going to not just be learning, but we're going to be listening as decision makers. And I know there's some decision makers even on this call, so that we can continue to develop the services, the self-directed services and supports in New Jersey. So please continue to tune in, continue to share your experiences and your questions and your concerns, so that this is a system that will ultimately be available for whomever wants it whenever they need it. So back to kind of where we are today. When COVID was making its way through our state, the Collaborative for Citizens Directed Supports New Jersey submitted a community innovation plan, a letter of intent, and it was to produce a conference like this. And the concept was really timely and welcomed by the Council on Developmental Disabilities, since it was aimed to resurrect the New Jersey Self-Direction Conference, because a conference like this had existed in years past. And the priority of educating and engaging stakeholders and understanding the vision and the mechanics of self-direction, which, today was visionary, but mechanics will come. The how-tos, hearing directly from advocates, hearing from families who participate, hearing from support coordinators, from financial consultants, from the state director of DDD. There is so much more to come in this series. So there is a commitment at the council. There's a commitment within this group to provide the history and the lessons around the self-direction movement. And I can't wait to see more that's coming along in this series. The council particularly liked the Collaborative's approach that individuals with disabilities and families would not only be participating in the sessions, but they were also on the planning team. So thank you for those advocates and family members who have participated in planning the conference. We couldn't be more delighted that despite the challenges presented over the past 2 years, that we're really marching forward in our investment in self-direction. We haven't, really stopped, but the fact that, COVID presented so many other barriers, we really have put that in its place and said we need to continue to move on, because people's lives continue regardless of what COVID, how COVID has impacted that. So thank you for the commitment through the New Jersey Collaborative for Citizen-Directed Supports. Thank you for the members of the Self-Direction Planning team. And thank you, Sue, for being with us today and, laying the foundation for this series. It's very much appreciated. And I hope that we all can continue to engage in this conversation, because you're right, Sue, you need to hear it all in order to have a full, not just the full representation, but to also listen and learn from each other. So thank you, Marion. Thank you, Sue. And thank you all that have participated. I think that there's another video loop. And please share the conference with your friends. And we hope to see you all at the next session. Marion, I'll just turn it back to you in case there's something I've missed.
Not at all. Both of you. I don't want to follow both of you ever again, because it's a very tough act. No, thank you, obviously, Mercedes and the council, and Sue, thank you. And thanks to everybody. I agree with you. This was a safe space, apparently, for people to feel like they could express themselves. And that is a big part of moving forward, is understanding it from all perspectives and doing our very best. And one of the main goals of this series, and you spoke to it, Sue, perhaps without even knowing it, is to bring this community together and work together. We have commitment from DDD leadership. They were part of planning this. They're on today. We thank them. Council members, leaders from the Bog Center, self-advocates, family members, support coordinators, supports brokers, people who are supporting people directly. So it really does, it takes a community, it takes a village. And if this piece of it helps to kind of reignite that, then, we're on our way to doing our job. So Donna, thank you. I'll leave you with the last word. I know you put some stuff in the chat, and I know we're almost at time, but thanks all for the opportunity to be a part of this.
Yeah, thanks, Marion. I definitely don't want to follow all of you awesome ladies, and just a thank you to everyone who joined. I put it in the chat. I think, if we're open to sharing our thoughts, and as Mercedes said, opening to listen. I think that we are going to have a very successful conference. So thank you everyone for joining, and please join us next for the history of New Jersey, where we will talk about how it all began, with all of our, with all of the different programs. So we look forward to February 23rd. Please register, and we will also be hearing from our state friends to talk about how things are going now, where we are today. So thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.